So there was also this topic that you broke down of cognitive empathy versus emotional empathy. And I was just hoping if you could expand on that a bit more, because I thought that that was really helpful for me to understand.
Sure. So emotional empathy we talked about in relation to listening, and then cognitive empathy we put it in a whole other chapter in understanding to kind of emphasize that these are, we think of them as different. So emotional empathy is that resonating with someone emotionally, so that if they're feeling some emotion, that you start to feel some of that too. Sometimes people call it like hot empathy because it's emotional, like you can feel it, you can feel the emotion yourself. Whereas cognitive empathy is more, it's not necessarily feeling the same emotion, but it's more cognitively perspective taking, like thinking, well, from Nick's point of view, he may see it this way. It's not necessarily that I'm feeling what you're feeling, but I'm reflecting cognitively on what the way you may be seeing it. So that's generally how I think about the difference between emotional empathy and cognitive empathy.
Mm. No, I think that breaking that down was helpful for me because you spoke about how extending emotional empathy too far can be can take us out of this process of attunement to a certain extent if we can't balance these two things. And I think that's so important to say because I do think that there is this huge emphasis on like we really need to empathize with this person as much as we can.
Mm-hmm.
But what is that? Yeah, how is that serving them? Like, are we actually holding this space for them and being a good participant in this conversation if we're only doing that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a way, I mean, you may have, I don't know what your guys' experiences are too as clinicians, but I feel like when I see patients now, um, I emotionally empathize with them often. Like I feel what they're feeling, but then for some reason, I don't know if it's just years of doing this, I don't usually hold on to it too much past the session time. So it's not like it usually, I mean, occasionally this happens, but it's not like it just ruins my whole evening because I can't get myself out of that emotion that patient or client was feeling. Um, so it's a kind of an ability to resonate with someone and emotionally empathize, but not take it so far that you're just consumed with it and that you completely lose yourself in it and you're overwhelmed by it. Um, and on the other hand, I think if you only had cognitive empathy and you didn't have emotional empathy, I mean, in the book, we sort of allude to some kinds of psychopathology, I guess, or, and one of the things we allude to is psychopathy um, and sort of psychopathic personality can have cognitive empathy. They can understand, they can sort of take other people's point of view to the extent to manipulate them, right? Like they know that I can manipulate you because you see things this way and I can do this and that. But at least classically, what's described is that the psychopath sort of doesn't have as much emotional empathy. So they're not really resonating with you emotionally. They're cognitively able to take your perspective, but they're not really, if you're distressed, it doesn't really bother them very much. And so I think both of them are valuable. I think having some balance between both cognitive empathy and emotional empathy is really important.
I like how you mentioned that phrase of holding space. We have just been writing about that recently as well, because I think even if you're not a clinician, sometimes when someone's telling you something super emotional, you could get wrapped up in their emotion. You could also maybe get sidetracked in how you experience something super similar and bring that to the exchange in a way where, it kind of derails from that other person. And so I love that concept of, being emotionally empathetic, but yet holding that space for that person until they give you that indicator that it's kind of, they're shooting it back or there's that back and forth, I think can strengthen that connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that whole phrase holding space, it reminds me of what we were talking about, like the classic view of attunement of mothers and infants or parents and infants. And it's like, if you think of like a mother and an infant, and like an infant being really like distressed and crying and so on, and if the mother sort of holds space for that infant, I mean, she is empathetic. It can cause her distress that her baby's crying or whatever, but she's able to kind of have a holding environment, like hold space for that. And she doesn't ideally get completely so overwhelmed by it that she freaks out and she's on the floor crying and screaming, and then the baby's crying and screaming. It's her ability to both empathize, feel with the baby, but yet regulate herself and sort of hold a space for the baby that enables the baby to regulate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, right. Like as a parent, you can't just go to your child and start screaming if they're screaming. Like it doesn't work like that. Like we got to be able to maintain ourselves. And yeah, I think this is definitely something I've been thinking a lot about in preparation for this conversation, of like how this is so translatable to how we see caregiver child attachment, of like how we do want to kind of show up in conversation later on in life. Like there, of course, are going to be times to where we're really dysregulated and it's hard to stay attuned. And that's completely valid. But yeah, if we're properly attuning to somebody and they're in a time of distress or they're really opening up to you, like it's good to try to be a base and reflect back like what's going on and be supportive in that sense. So yeah, just seeing how these things are so fundamental in this child-parent interaction and how it's so easy, I guess, personally, to lose sight of how these things do carry on later in life, but how applicable they still are so much.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and the more that you know about yourself in that way, maybe know about your own attachment style or know about how you relate to people. I mean, sometimes I promote therapy as a way of, you might not have an immediate issue. You just want to learn more about yourself and the sort of triggers that you have, or the, styles of relating that you have, and all of that insight and awareness is then going to just make it so much more effective to connect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think like, if you look at the research on attunement, it's mostly in two areas. One is mother-infant interactions, and the other is therapist-patient interactions.
Yeah.
That's where like most of the research is on attunement. I mean, I guess what we're arguing in this book is that this concept goes way beyond those two specific types of interactions to so many different types of interactions. But yeah, there's something about those particular kinds of relationships that where attunement really comes into play.
I think it's just so heightened, maybe, or just kind of pure in some way.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching, everybody. We appreciate you tuning into that, and we hope you found that helpful.
If you're interested in watching more professors give us a deep dive in some of their areas of expertise, please click on the video below.
And also subscribe right here. We hope you have a good day.
See you in the next one.
See ya.